the High Republic's greatest mysteries, unfolded at night, beneath the vaulted ceilings of the Jedi Archives, where shelves stretch toward infinity and the air hums softly with the faint, crystalline whisper of holocrons in slumber. Night falls like a warm blanket over the galaxy's greatest treasury of knowledge, and in this rare hour, when the city outside is quiet and the sky over Coruscant glows with a slow drift of traffic lanes shimmering like rivers of light, the archives belong only to shadows, to secrets, and to you. The bronze light of a few floating lanterns casts gentle halos across the marble floor, while ancient statues of long-forgotten masters seem to lean in, listening, their stone robes flowing in shapes carved by hands that vanished centuries before the High Republic's golden age began. And somewhere in the distance, the soft, steady click of an archivist droid echoes between stacks, careful not to disturb the night's calm. For here, among the neatly ordered rows of data rods, star charts, relics, and tomes whose leather has grown thin with time, lies a different kind of history, one not bound to the great speeches of the Senate or the dazzling heroics sung in temple halls, but to the quiet, lingering mysteries the High Republic kept in the corners of its light. Questions too dangerous or too strange to share with the midday crowds. Stories whispered by cautious masters to curious Padawans, who, under the flicker of candlelight, swore they could hear the Force itself breathing between the lines. Tonight, we will walk slowly down these silent aisles, past shelves labeled with worlds the Republic no longer maps, past holocron vaults that only open at the brush of a Jedi's hand, past star charts with corridors erased in neat, deliberate ink, and I will show you the places where the archivists keep the records. Few dare to request the files on the nameless, creatures without shadow. The sealed reports from the great hyperspace disaster, whose true cause was never confirmed. The restricted maps of the occlusion zone, the testimonies of those who stood in the presence of the leveler and survived to tell it in shaking voices. And the planetary myths that speak of winds that whisper names in the dark. Each mystery is a thread in a larger tapestry, and as we follow them together, you will see how the High Republic's brightest era was also one that harbored shadows. For light does not banish the unknown, it simply makes its edges easier to see. Here, beneath the starlit archives, with the galaxy outside slipping slowly toward sleep, we will drift between truth and legend, between canon and whispers, unfolding the High Republic's greatest secrets in a voice soft enough to keep the night unbroken. For this is not a time for battles or alarms, but for curiosity, for wonder, for the steady rhythm of footsteps across marble floors and the slow turning of pages that have waited centuries to be read. And as you listen, you may feel just for a moment as though the Force itself has leaned close to speak, not with answers but with questions. And in that space between knowing and dreaming, you will discover that the most powerful thing the archives hold is not knowledge. It is the mystery that keeps you reaching for more. In the long and glittering memory of the High Republic, when the Jedi shone at their most luminous, and the Republic's reach swept farther than any hyperspace corridor had ever carried ships before, there exists a wound in the record, an absence deliberately carved out of the song of history, and in that absence lives the whisper of the nameless. To most of the galaxy, their name means nothing. To those who have felt their presence, it means the end. These were not beasts in the conventional sense, for no natural world would bear such children. They were the shadows behind the light, the voids between the stars, creatures that fed not on flesh, but on the very bond between a Jedi and the Force. To speak of the nameless is to speak of dread so pure it does not roar. It seeps a slow and suffocating silence that fills the lungs and hollows the heart. In the archives, even in the High Republic's golden age, their existence was confined to the most restricted of records, stored under master-level clearance, their files marked not with detailed hollows, but with the kind of vague descriptors that suggested even writing down their truth was dangerous. Those who studied the nameless agreed on little except this: they could not be looked at without consequence. For most beings, the nameless were like shadows that the eye refused to focus on. For Force sensitives, they were something worse, an annihilation. Witnesses spoke of a creeping petrification, their limbs stiffening, skin paling, the light of their connection to the Force bleeding away as if drained by an invisible tide. Statues of Jedi, frozen mid-motion, were left behind in places where the nameless had walked, each one a memorial no one dared to erect. The origin of the nameless remains tangled in myth and misdirection. Some stories root them in the wilds of the unknown regions, birthed on a world untouched by the Force, where its currents could not flow, and life adapted to fill that void. Others claim they were crafted not born shaped by ancient enemies of the Jedi during wars so distant that even the most ancient masters spoke of them as legend. A few whispered that the nameless had no single home, but drifted along forgotten hyperspace routes like spores carried on the wind, seeking places where Force sensitives might gather. What is known in canon and in the broader web of legends is that the Nihil, that anarchic swarm of raiders and marauders, learned to weaponize them. The Nihil themselves seemed almost in awe of the nameless, treating them not as pets or allies, but as forces to be unleashed and then avoided. Marchion Ro, the Eye of the Nihil, understood them well enough to set them against the Jedi, wielding them like a blade made of pure absence. In every clash where the nameless appeared, the result was the same. Jedi who should have stood unshaken broke, not from injury but from the sudden hollowness, where their connection to the Force had been. Descriptions from survivors are rare and often contradictory, a testament to how perception itself seemed to warp in the nameless presence. Some spoke of skeletal beasts, all jagged angles and impossible proportions, their forms obscured by shimmering distortions, as though reality itself bent to keep them unseen. Others described them as hulking creatures with too many limbs, their movements an unsettling blend of fluid and jerky, like marionettes pulled by an invisible hand. Most agreed on one thing: their faces, if they could be called that, inspired a primal revulsion, the kind that strikes before thought can intervene, as though the brain recognized something it was never meant to process. Even the Force itself seemed to recoil from them. Where most life forms glowed in a Jedi's perception, the nameless were voids, cold and silent, creating dead zones where even the most skilled master could not sense danger until it was too late. The power of the nameless lay not only in their ability to sever a Jedi from the Force, but in the fear they left behind. Jedi who survived encounters often emerged changed quieter, less certain, haunted by dreams of an endless dark where they wandered, unable to feel the light that had once guided them. Some left the Order entirely, unable to bear the emptiness their connection had once filled. Others buried their memories under layers of discipline, masking the trauma with an even greater adherence to the code. Over centuries, these stories were buried deeper and deeper, until the name Nameless was little more than a ghost in the margins of the archive's oldest files. In some ways, this erasure was deliberate, a collective choice by the Order to protect younger generations from a truth they could neither prepare for nor defeat. And yet, the Nameless remained. Even as the High Republic spread its influence and the Jedi served as its most luminous guardians, these creatures could not be erased from the galaxy. Their appearances were rare, but always decisive. A single Nameless could turn a battle in the Neal's favor, reducing trained Jedi to helpless victims within moments. Entire strike teams were lost to them, their final moments preserved only in corrupted holo-recordings filled with static and the sound of choked screams. The Nihil, understanding their value, became more ambitious, using the Nameless not just to win battles, but to fracture the Jedi's confidence in themselves. In some accounts, they were even released in carefully orchestrated patterns, targeting specific Jedi whose loss would demoralize their comrades. In the end, the Nameless were not destroyed. They were never truly defeated in the High Republic era. Their mystery endured, surviving in whispers and in the fear that even the mightiest guardians of the Republic could be rendered powerless. It is this, perhaps, that makes them such a haunting legacy, not merely their physical danger, but the idea that something could exist beyond the reach of the Force itself. To the Jedi, whose identity is bound to that living energy, the Nameless represented an existential threat. If the Force could be taken from you, even for a moment, what were you then? In the deep hours of the night, when the archives are silent and the stars drift beyond the high windows, that question still lingers like a shadow in the corner of the room. The great hyperspace disaster began, as many galactic tragedies do, not with a war drum or a declaration, but with an ordinary journey, a routine shipment through the glittering lanes of hyperspace. The Legacy Run, a massive cargo freighter operated by the Bind Guild, was nothing remarkable in itself. It ferried settlers, goods, and dreams from the core worlds to the distant outer rim, threading its way through the great galactic arteries that connected civilizations like a living circulatory system. But somewhere along that route, far from any planet's safety, reality buckled. The details, even now, are buried under layers of conflicting reports and political secrecy. Yet, what is certain is this: the Legacy Run broke apart mid-flight, not in real space, but inside hyperspace. This alone was impossible by every standard charter navigational protocol. Hyperspace was meant to be smooth, predictable, an ocean with hidden reefs, yes, but one the Jedi and Republic had mapped for centuries. And yet, in that moment, it became chaos. The freighter's debris did not vanish into some unreachable void. Instead, its fragments erupted from hyperspace at random across the galaxy, hurtling into real space at incredible velocity, destroying stations for centuries. And yet, in that moment, it became chaos. The freighter's debris did not vanish into some unreachable void. Instead, its fragments erupted from hyperspace at random across the galaxy, hurtling into real space at incredible velocity, destroying stations for centuries. And yet, in that moment, it became chaos. The freighter's debris did not vanish into some unreachable void. Instead, its fragments erupted from hyperspace at random across the galaxy, hurtling into real space at incredible velocity, destroying stations for centuries. And yet, in that moment, it became chaos. The freighter's debris did not vanish into some unreachable void. Instead, its fragments erupted from hyperspace at random across the galaxy, hurtling into real space at incredible velocity, destroying stations, ships, and lives without warning. The first reports that reached Coruscant were confused and contradictory. One sector reported flaming wreckage striking a spaceport. Another swore it had seen a comet split into deadly shards. A third described entire settlements wiped out in seconds by impacts no one could track. Jedi stationed on distant worlds spoke of sudden tremors in the Force, like ripples spreading from a single catastrophic drop. But the real horror lay in what followed. The emergences, as they came to be called, did not stop after the initial destruction. They kept coming, hours, days, and even weeks after the Legacy Run's breakup. Ships and lives, without warning. The first reports that reached Coruscant were confused and contradictory. One sector reported flaming wreckage striking a spaceport. Another swore it had seen a comet split into deadly shards. A third described entire settlements wiped out in seconds by impacts no one could track. Jedi stationed on distant worlds spoke of sudden tremors in the Force, like ripples spreading from a single catastrophic drop. But the real horror lay in what followed. The emergences, as they came to be called, did not stop after the initial destruction. They kept coming, hours, days, and even weeks after the Legacy Run's breakup. Hyperspace debris continued to erupt into the galaxy without pattern, as if time itself were still spitting out the disaster in slow motion. Ships on routine patrol were blindsided. Families on remote colonies saw the sky tear open above them, only for burning metal to scream down from nowhere. No one knew where the next emergence would be, and hyperspace lanes were suddenly death traps. In the High Republic era, the Jedi were at the height of their influence, but even they had no precedent for this. Master Avar Kriss, stationed on Hetzal Prime during one of the earliest emergences, coordinated a massive rescue effort using not just Jedi, but civilian ships out in seconds by impacts no one could track. Jedi stationed on distant worlds spoke of sudden tremors in the Force, like ripples spreading from a single catastrophic drop. But the real horror lay in what followed. The emergences, as they came to be called, did not stop after the initial destruction. They kept coming, hours, days, and even weeks after the Legacy Run's breakup, out in seconds by impacts no one could track. Jedi stationed on distant worlds spoke of sudden tremors in the Force, like ripples spreading from a single catastrophic drop. But the real horror lay in what followed. The emergences, as they came to be called, did not stop after the initial destruction. They kept coming, hours, days, and even weeks after the Legacy Run's breakup. Hyperspace debris continued to erupt into the galaxy without pattern, as if time itself was still spitting out the disaster in slow motion. Ships on routine patrol, hyperspace debris continued to erupt into the galaxy without pattern, as if time itself was still spitting out the disaster in slow motion. Ships on routine patrol were blindsided. Families on remote colonies saw the sky tear open above them, only for burning metal to scream down from nowhere. No one knew where the next emergence would be, and hyperspace lanes were suddenly death traps. Were blindsided. Families on remote colonies saw the sky tear open above them, only for burning metal to scream down from nowhere. No one knew where the next emergence would be, and hyperspace lanes were suddenly death traps. In the High Republic era, the Jedi were at the height of their influence, but even they had no precedent for this. Master Avar Kriss, stationed on Hetzal Prime during one of the earliest emergences, coordinated a massive rescue. In the High Republic era, the Jedi were at the height of their influence, but even they had no precedent for this. Master Avar Kriss, stationed on Hetzal Prime during one of the earliest emergences, coordinated a massive rescue effort using not just Jedi, but civilian ships. Of worlds, not only to help with rescue efforts, but to investigate the strange patterns of the emergencies. Some reported finding fragments of the Legacy Run embedded deep in planetary crusts, impossibly intact given the speeds involved. Others found scorched pieces of metal carrying no serial numbers at all, as if they had been swapped in from entirely different ships. The emergencies themselves seemed to follow known navigational logic and appearing in areas light years apart within hours of one another. For a galaxy accustomed to the reliability of hyperspace, this was as terrifying as it was incomprehensible. The unanswered whispers of the great hyperspace disaster still echo in historical accounts because not all of them were ever silenced. Even after the Neil's involvement became known, scholars in later years questioned whether the pirates could truly have caused a catastrophe on such a scale without aid from forces natural or otherwise beyond their control. Some hypothesized that the Nihil had stumbled upon ancient technology, perhaps even remnants from the Rakata or the Qua, and were merely exploiting it without understanding its full power. Others believed that the emergences hinted at the unstable nature of hyperspace itself, suggesting that if one point in the network could unravel, the entire system might someday collapse. In the stillness of the Jedi Archives late at night, you can find researchers bent over old star charts, tracing the coordinates of the emergences as if trying to see a pattern that might finally give up its secret dot. Yet, perhaps the most haunting aspect of the disaster is its personal toll. Families were scattered across the stars, cut off from one another as travel became dangerous. But if one point in the network could unravel, the entire system might someday collapse. In the stillness of the Jedi Archives late at night, you can find researchers bent over old star charts, tracing the coordinates of the emergences as if trying to see a pattern that might finally give up its secret dot. Yet, perhaps the most haunting aspect of the disaster is its personal toll. Families were scattered across the stars, cut off from one another as travel became dangerous. Entire cultures in the Outer Rim were isolated for months, forced to survive without the trade and aid they had come to rely on. Jedi who had been raised to believe in their Order's ability to protect all life found themselves confronted with the truth that they could not be everywhere at once, that some tragedies could not be stopped no matter how many lightsabers were lit in the darkness. And through it all, hyperspace, that vast silent ocean, remained as it always had been, beautiful, essential, and utterly indifferent to those who traveled through it. Even now, when historians and storytellers recount the great hyperspace disaster, there's a pause in their voices meant to exist. On every official Republic star map of the High Republic era, the region appeared only as a faintly tinted, unmarked void at the edge of the Outer Rim, a blank space with no lanes, no navigational data, and no reason to go there. But among pilots, smugglers, and old spacers swapping stories in dim cantinas, it had another name, the Lost Sector. It was whispered about in the same way one might speak of cursed hyperspace lanes or systems swallowed by black holes, not in the language of science, but in the low, careful tone reserved for dangerous truths. No one agreed exactly where it began or ended, only that ships which entered without precise coordinates rarely returned. Those that did came back wrong. The Republic's official stance was simple. The occlusion zone was a navigational anomaly caused by dense mass shadows from uncharted stellar formations, making hyperspace travel too unstable for charting. The Jedi, ever cautious, did not challenge this explanation in public. But privately, in the deep vaults of the Jedi Archives, there were records fragmentary, restricted, suggesting the lost sector had been avoided for centuries before hyperspace mass shadow theory was even understood. Ancient wayfinders marked it with symbols meaning sealed or forbidden, and some maps dating back to the time of the Old Republic depicted it surrounded by strange glyphs whose meanings had long since been lost. Those rare captains who dared to venture into the occlusion zone, often desperate smugglers or treasure seekers, described a region unlike anywhere else in the galaxy. Hyperspace itself seemed to misbehave there. Lanes folded in on themselves, depositing ships light years from their intended coordinates. Stars shifted position in subtle but disorienting ways, as if the constellations were alive and watching. More than one pilot swore they had dropped into real space to find themselves in the orbit of a planet that was not listed on any chart, only to jump again and later be unable to retrace the course. Even advanced Navi computers recorded corrupted data whole hours missing from their logs, sensor readings looping in impossible patterns, ghostly echoes of ships that had not been seen for decades. In the High Republic era, Chancellor Lina So's Great Works Initiative put pressure on the Jedi to chart and unify every corner of the galaxy. Yet, the occlusion zone remained a blank spot on her otherwise ambitious map. It wasn't for lack of trying. Several Republic exploratory missions were sent into its boundaries, most in coordination with Jedi escorts. The first few reported strange but survivable conditions: sensor interference, inexplicable engine malfunctions, and an eerie absence of communications from other vessels. But as the missions pressed deeper, the reports became more troubling. On one ill-fated voyage, an entire exploration fleet transmitted a single garbled distress call, a fragment of static followed by what some archivists claim was the faint hum of chanting in a language not recognized by the Jedi translation matrix. No further contact was ever made, and the ships were never recovered. The Jedi Council debated the matter in closed session. Masters who had served on the frontier spoke with unusual urgency, urging the Council to treat the occlusion zone as a matter of more than mere navigation safety. Some believed the region might be home to remnants of the Sith, or to an entirely different Force tradition, one hostile to outsiders. Others suspected that the lost sector was tied to ancient hyperspace technology long forgotten, perhaps even connected to the mysterious paths used by the Nihil. There were even suggestions that the strange region could be the result of an artificial manipulation of space-time, a cordon deliberately placed around something the galaxy was not meant to find. Of all the Jedi who investigated, perhaps the most famous or infamous was Master Orla Jarini, a wayseeker known for following her own instincts beyond the direction of the Council. She ventured into the outer edges of the occlusion zone on multiple occasions, keeping sparse but telling records. In one entry, she describes finding the wreck of a ship that appeared to be thousands of years old, drifting in perfect condition with no crew aboard. In another, she recounts meditating within the zone and feeling the Force turn inward upon itself, folding like water drawn into a whirlpool. The sensation, she wrote, was neither fully dark nor light. but something in between a balance that resisted being touched. Her findings were never made public, though fragments have leaked over the years to scholars and archivists fascinated by the sector. The most tantalizing mysteries of the lost sector come from scattered accounts of worlds hidden within its shifting boundaries. Some explorers claim to have found entire civilizations there, isolated from the Republic for thousands of years, with cultures that had evolved along paths utterly unlike anything in the known galaxy. These societies often displayed unique relationships with the Force traditions that neither aligned with Jedi doctrine nor resembled Sith teachings, suggesting a lineage that had branched away before either order's rise to dominance. In at least one recorded case, a Jedi surveyor reported meeting Force users whose powers appeared to reject the influence of the wider Force entirely, functioning instead within what he described as a sealed bubble of localized energy. This report, too, was buried deep in the restricted archives. The occlusion zone's secrecy also served a more pragmatic purpose for those who knew how to exploit it. The Nihil, once their power grew, were rumored to have established hideouts within its tangled folds, using their mysterious path drives to navigate regions no Republic ship could enter safely. Pirate lords and black market cartels likewise used the sector as a graveyard for stolen ships and as a staging ground for raids on outer rim trade routes. Yet even the most ruthless outlaw captains were wary of lingering too long inside. There were too many stories of ships that failed to return, too many reports of crew members disappearing mid-watch without triggering an alarm, too many whispered warnings of voices in the hull that seemed to beckon in the dark. For the ordinary citizen of the High Republic, the Lost Sector was little more than a ghost story, a cautionary tale to keep adventurous young pilots from wandering too far off the lanes. But for the Jedi, the occlusion zone was an unanswered question, and in the Force, unanswered questions have weight. Some masters argued that such mysteries were to be respected, even left alone, lest they stir forces not yet ready to be confronted. Others insisted that leaving the zone unexamined left the Republic vulnerable, especially if its secrets could be weaponized, as hyperspace travel had been during the Great Hyperspace Disaster. Even now, long after the fall of the High Republic, the occlusion zone remains a cartographic scar. Modern maps still avoid its interior, save for speculative outlines drawn by historians or enthusiasts of galactic anomalies. The Republic of that era never officially declared what it found there, if indeed it found anything at all. What we do know comes from fragments, logs smuggled out of the Jedi Archives, wreckage retrieved from deep space with strange inscriptions etched into the hull, and the accounts of those who swore they saw impossible worlds before hyperspace currents swept them away again. Perhaps the greatest mystery of all is whether the occlusion zone is truly a place, a fixed set of coordinates, or something far stranger. Some modern hyperspace physicists suggest it may be a kind of moving blind spot in the fabric of the galaxy, an area that shifts position over centuries. If so, it is less a map location than a phenomenon, one that might appear anywhere, or already be closer than the charts suggest. For those who still believe in the old tales, this is not a comforting thought. It means that the Lost Sector is not simply hidden at the edge of the galaxy. It is waiting. The deeper one drifts into the occlusion zone, the more it feels like the galaxy itself has turned inward, drawing a curtain between those inside and the rest of known space. Pilots who have dared the journey speak of an almost physical sensation of crossing over as if their ships passed through an invisible membrane. One moment, the star lines of hyperspace streak endlessly ahead, the navicomputer humming in rhythm with familiar coordinates. And the next, the light changes. The blues and whites of the hyperlane fade to muted, almost organic hues, deep greens, bruised purples, and unsettling shades of pale that no starfield should produce. It's as though hyperspace itself takes on the colors of something alive, something watching Dot. Once inside, time becomes unreliable. Crew logs from recovered ships reveal conflicting accounts. Some swear they spent only hours in the zone before emerging, while others report weeks or months, even when chronometers insist the same number of standard days have passed. The dissonance is not just in timekeeping, but in memory. Some survivors report fragments of experiences they cannot place, conversations with crewmates who were never aboard. The sight of planets or stations that do not appear on any known registry, or the sound of voices speaking in tongues older than the Republic itself. The Jedi who studied these phenomena often referred to them as resonance echoes, distortions in the Force caused by the zone's unique spatial anomalies. Padawan Terran Voss, in one of the few declassified mission logs, described it as the Force turning back on itself. Like a mirror that reflects more than your image, it reflects what's behind you and what's behind that. Many in the Order dismissed his account as the overactive imagination of youth, but others heard truth in his words. And then there are the structures. While the occlusion zone appears empty to most long-range sensors, explorers who navigate its deeper folds have reported encounters with immense constructs, some the size of space stations, others the scale of small moons, all abandoned, all devoid of life, and all built in architectural styles that predate known galactic history. A few resemble temples, carved from seamless black stone that resists any form of scanning or sample extractions. Others look like the husks of colossal vessels, drifting with no power, but holding interior spaces so vast they could swallow a Star Destroyer whole. One legendary account, smuggled out of the Jedi Archives, claims that deep within one of these derelicts was a chamber lit by an eternal beam of light, a pillar of gold that neither flickered nor cast a shadow, no matter where the observer stood. In the High Republic era, these discoveries carried dangerous implications. The occlusion zone wasn't just a navigational hazard, it was a vault. And like all vaults, it implied the existence of a key and of someone who had once locked it. What then was the zone meant to keep in? And what was it meant to keep out? Rumors among Outer Rim traders spoke of ancient Force sects, neither Jedi nor Sith, who had made the zone their refuge. They supposedly practiced techniques long erased from the galaxy, ways of bending the Force that defied the binary of light and dark. Some claimed these practitioners could hide entire planets from detection or turn the currents of hyperspace away from a chosen system so no one could ever reach it again. Whether such groups ever truly existed is unknown, but the idea lingered, haunting every mission proposal the Republic put forward. Not all mysteries in the zone are rooted in legend. One undeniable truth is that the Nihil used it to devastating effect. With their path engines, they could weave through the unstable lanes like water through cracks in stone, striking where the Republic least expected and vanishing without a trace. Jedi pursuit teams often followed them in and never returned. Those rare few who did emerge were often altered. They spoke less, slept poorly, and sometimes abandoned the Order altogether, retreating to remote worlds or requesting reassignment far from deep space operations. Master Indakalis, a historian of the High Republic, once theorized that the zone's very nature might have been weaponized. If its strange distortions could disorient even seasoned Jedi, then perhaps they were not natural phenomena at all, but the byproduct of ancient technology or something far worse. Her most controversial paper proposed that the zone could be the site of a massive dormant force wound, a scar left by some calamity so old it had been forgotten by every major culture. The council officially rejected her theory, but her research was quietly locked behind higher security clearance not long after. One particularly chilling account comes from the Republic Longbeam expedition, a mission that vanished into the zone and returned more than 2 years later with only 3 surviving crew. The survivors' testimonies were inconsistent, but one detail remained the same in all versions. They had encountered a world of glass. They described landing on a surface that reflected the stars above in perfect clarity, as though walking across the night sky itself. Structures rose like shards, translucent and sharp enough to cut hull plating, and within them moved shapes that mirrored the explorers' every gesture, yet did not always match their movements exactly. The crew refused to elaborate on what happened next, but none of them ever returned to active duty, and one later took a vow of silence. Modern scholars often dismiss such stories as embellishments or hallucinations brought on by prolonged exposure to hyperspace instability. But the consistency of the details across centuries of unrelated accounts is harder to explain away. The lost sector of the occlusion zone, whatever it truly is, behaves less like a fixed location and more like a shifting labyrinth. Entire systems could lie within its folds, only accessible at certain alignments of stars or after precise navigational patterns that few living beings still know. And if the zone moves, as some hyperspace cartographers believe, then the galaxy's maps are chasing a ghost that can never be fully pinned down. The Jedi of the High Republic faced a choice: seal the zone completely or commit to unraveling its secrets. In the end, they did neither. The Nihil War shifted priorities, and Chancellor Lina So's great works pushed resources toward more public, politically visible projects. The zone remained a blind spot tolerated, feared, and left to drift on the edges of official awareness. In the quiet corridors of the Jedi Archives, though, whispers persisted that the Order had left something unfinished there, something that might one day return the galaxy's attention to the occlusion zone, whether it was ready or not. Even now, in the age of the New Republic and beyond, that shadow persists. Modern exploration crews occasionally report anomalies eerily similar to the old High Republic accounts: misaligned star charts, shifting constellations, and encounters with derelicts whose hull metal cannot be identified in any database. The Republic officially lists these as unrelated navigational mishaps. Those who know better simply shake their heads. The lost sector is still out there. It has always been out there, and for reasons no one can fully articulate, it seems to be waiting for something or someone. The Leveler's legend was already enough to make even seasoned Jedi lower their voices, but during the High Republic's golden age, it was more than a story. It was a shadow that could move. To understand its silent hunt is to understand fear stripped to its bones. The Leveler was not a beast in the simple sense of teeth and claws. It was something deeper, a predator whose true weapon was the Force itself, or rather, the ability to strip it away, to peel it from a Jedi like light drained from a dying star. Its victims did not bleed. They did not scream. Most did not even fight. They simply froze their eyes wide in disbelief as the connection that had guided them since childhood went dark. The Jedi had no precedent for this kind of death. They knew pain. They knew rage. They even knew defeat. But the Leveler's hunt was a clean, cold thing. leaving behind only the shells of beings who had been luminous moments before. Flesh petrified, skin turned to stone-like husks, and the last expression was often one of horror, as if the victim had seen something that should never have existed. That was the cruelty of the hunt. The prey understood what was happening, but could do nothing to stop it. In the early days of its reappearance, the Nihil used the leveler like a phantom blade. Marcian Ro, the Eye of the Nihil, had inherited the beast along with the relics and half-remembered rituals of his family's past. To him, the leveler was not just a weapon, it was justice. Vengeance on an order he believed had stolen everything from his people. The Nihil's chaotic raids were deadly enough, but when paired with the leveler, they became a perfect trap. The marauders would strike, lure Jedi into pursuit, and then lead them unknowingly into the beast's hunting ground. Few ever returned. What made the leveler's hunt so insidious was its silence. It did not roar to announce its presence. It did not leave bloodied trails or scorch marks. Instead, it arrived in the way shadows lengthen too quickly, or how the air seemed to thicken in the lungs. Jedi reported sudden bursts of disorientation, a moment when their senses faltered, as if they had stepped into a vacuum where the Force itself refused to exist. In those moments, the leveler was already near. Some survivors said they felt a faint vibration under their feet, like a pulse in the earth. Others heard whispers in languages they did not know but somehow understood. A few smelled nothing at all, and that absence, the total void of scent in places where smoke and blood should have been, was enough to make them realize they were not alone. The beast was not bound to one form in the way lesser creatures were. Descriptions varied wildly. Some swore it was a massive reptilian shape with jagged tusks. Others described it as a shifting mass of stone and shadow, its outline constantly changing, as if their eyes could not decide what they were looking at. The Jedi called this phenomenon perception fracture, the inability to fully perceive the leveler's true form without losing mental stability. This was not an illusion. It was the result of the Force recoiling from the creature, denying Jedi the clarity they relied on to interpret what they saw. The leveler did not hunt for sustenance in the biological sense. Its prey was chosen with precision, often striking at the most connected Jedi in a group first. The moment that luminous thread was severed, panic would ripple through the survivors. Jedi who had trained together for years found themselves unable to sense each other's intentions in battle. Blades clashed too late, defenses faltered, and formations broke. The hunt was as much psychological as it was physical. On planets like Dalna, the aftermath of a leveler attack was unlike any other battlefield. The petrified remains of Jedi and civilians stood frozen where they had fallen some mid-step, some reaching for comrades, others bracing for a blow that never came. These were not statues. They were once living beings, caught in the final instant before their essence was stolen away. The Nihil, ever the opportunists, would leave these grisly markers as warnings to the Republic. This is what happens to those who send Jedi after us. The Jedi tried to study the leveler, but every attempt ended in failure or loss. Samples of its stone-like remains crumbled to dust when removed from the site of a kill. Recordings were corrupted, holocams failing just as the creature came into view. The only reliable knowledge came from fragmented witness testimony, and even those were colored by terror. Padawan Bel Zettifar once compared the sensation of its approach to standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing the ground is about to give way but having no control over when it happens. His words haunted the Order, a reminder that this was not a predator they could simply outfight. Marchion. Ro used this fear with surgical precision. The leveler was unleashed sparingly, making its appearances unpredictable. Jedi might go months without hearing of it, only for it to strike again with devastating efficiency. In this way, the hunt extended far beyond the moments when the creature actually moved. The idea of the leveler became its own weapon. Jedi second-guessed every strange sensation in the Force, every unexplained chill in the air. Missions were delayed, strategies altered, all because no one wanted to be the next name on the list of petrified dead. There were whispers that the leveler was not alone, that it was merely one of a species, or a manifestation of something older still. The Nihil spoke in low voices about the nameless, as if there were more waiting in the dark places between stars. If that was true, the High Republic had faced only the beginning of the hunt, and if more than one leveler could move through the galaxy, then no Jedi enclave would be safe. In the end, the leveler's silent hunt was not about numbers killed or territory gained. It was about breaking the will of the Jedi, unraveling the trust they placed in their bond with the Force. For an order that had stood for millennia, the true danger was not the beast itself, but the doubt it left behind, the question that would echo in every Jedi mind long after the creature was gone. What am I without the Force? That question lingered in the archives, unspoken but always there, like the shadow of something moving just beyond the light. And as long as the leveler or whatever spawned it remained in the galaxy, the hunt was never truly over. On Dalna, the dark did not simply fall, it gathered. It gathered in the valleys like low water, pooling until it spilled over into the forests. It crept down the winding canyons, coating the rock in shadows too deep for moonlight to touch. The people who lived there had always known the night was heavier in this part of the galaxy, but during the final years of the High Republic, that weight turned into something else, something watching, something listening. The Jedi had come to Dalna before, investigating reports of strange disappearances, lights vanishing over the hills, voices calling in the dead of night that lured travelers off the road. At first, these were dismissed as local superstition. Dalna was a world of tight-knit settlements and old stories, some dating back long before the Republic's arrival. But when the first patrol failed to report in, when their signals winked out one by one without a trace of blaster fire or distress calls, the Order began to listen more closely. The locals had a name for it: the Whispering Dark. They said it came with no warning except for the sudden absence of sound. Crickets stopped chirping, wind stopped rustling the trees, and the quiet was so total it became its own kind of roar in the mind. Then the whispers began, not loud, not sharp, but persistent, as if someone was speaking just behind you. Their breath warm against your ear, their words half heard, but entirely understood. Some swore the voices were those of loved ones long dead. Others claimed they heard orders, promises, threats, all woven into the same hushed cadence. When the Jedi first encountered it, they thought it was some form of environmental anomaly, perhaps an unstable weather pattern or a rare natural predator using sound to disorient its prey. But the truth, as they soon learned, was far stranger. The Whispering Dark was not merely in the land, it was the land. Or perhaps it was what lived beneath it. Dalna's bedrock hid a network of caves older than the settlements, older than the Republic's maps, possibly older than the Jedi Order itself. The entrances were difficult to find, many hidden under tangled roots, others disguised as shadowed overhangs halfway down cliff faces. Those who descended into them never agreed on what they saw. Some described walls covered in markings that shifted when you looked away. Others claimed the tunnels bent back on themselves in impossible ways, as if the stone was not obeying the laws of space at all. But one detail was always the same. The deeper you went, the louder the whispers became, and the more you listened, the more they seemed to know you, your fears, your doubts, your failures. To Jedi, this was more dangerous than any physical attack. It was not the loss of the Force, as with the Leveler, but the corruption of it. Padawans returned from scouting missions pale and trembling, convinced they had heard their own masters plotting against them. Knights began to doubt their connection to their fellow Jedi, to question their own memories. In the archives, fragments possibly older than the Jedi Order itself. The entrances were difficult to find, many hidden under tangled roots, others disguised as shadowed overhangs halfway down cliff faces. Those who descended into them never agreed on what they saw. Some described walls covered in markings that shifted when you looked away. Others claimed the tunnels bent back on themselves in impossible ways, as if the stone was not obeying the laws of space at all. But one detail was always the same. The deeper you went, the louder the whispers became, and the more you listened, the more they seemed to know you, your fears, your doubts, your failures. Relics from his family's vaults. Some claimed he sought to bend the Whispering Dark to his will, to weaponize it the way he had with the Leveler. Others believed he wanted something older still, a truth buried in the caverns that even the Jedi feared to uncover. Whatever his goal, his forces moved with uncanny precision, bypassing natural hazards as though they already knew the paths. That suggested one of two things. Either the Nihil had help from Dalnans who had bargained with the Dark, or the Dark itself wanted them there. For the Jedi, confronting it was unlike any other battle. Lightsabers cast light, but in the Whispering Dark, illumination felt thin, as if it could be snuffed out with a thought. Even the hum of the blade seemed muted, swallowed before it reached the walls. Every step was a fight against the instinct to turn back. Masters instructed their Padawans to keep a running mantra, a steady repetition of the Jedi Code to drown out the voices. But the whispers always adapted, weaving themselves into the rhythm until the mantras themselves began to feel like lies. The most unsettling accounts came from Jedi who had spent hours in the caves only to emerge and find that days had passed outside. This temporal dissonance was not something the Order could explain. If the Whispering Dark could bend time within its domain, then it could fracture the coordination of entire campaigns, leaving Jedi out of step with events happening on the surface. Some like lies. The most unsettling accounts came from Jedi who had spent hours in the caves only to emerge and find that days had passed outside. This temporal dissonance was not something the Order could explain. If the Whispering Dark could bend time within its domain, then it could fracture the coordination of entire campaigns, leaving Jedi out of step with events happening on the surface. Some suspected it was a side effect of the deep force currents that ran through Dalna. Others whispered it was a deliberate trap, one meant to keep intruders from interfering until it was too late. Not all who went into the Whispering Dark were lost, not something the Order could explain. If the Whispering Dark could bend time within its domain, then it could fracture the coordination of entire campaigns, leaving Jedi out of step with events happening on the surface. Some suspected it was a side effect of the deep force currents that ran through Dalna. Others whispered it was a deliberate trap, one meant to keep intruders from interfering until it was too late. Not all who went into the Whispering Dark were lost. Some swear they can hear their names carried through the trees. To this day, the Whispering Dark of Dalna remains one of the High Republic's most unsettling mysteries. It wasn't defeated. It was not understood. It was only endured. And somewhere far below the surface, the mouth below waits, patient as stone, speaking in a voice only the fearful can hear. The Whispering Dark was not a mystery that yielded to brute force. When the Jedi Council first authorized a sustained presence on Dalna to investigate, it was not a fleet they sent, but a blend of seasoned knights, patient scholars, and those rare few with a talent for sensing what lay beneath words. Among them was Master Orla Jareni, who believed that the key to understanding the phenomenon lay not in sealing the caves, but in listening, truly listening, without letting the whispers take root. She entered the forests of Dalna not as a conqueror, but as a guest, walking unarmed except for her saber hilt at her side, her mind anchored in a steady breathing pattern older than the order itself. The locals regarded her with cautious respect. They had seen off-worlders come before, brash with their technology and bright lights, and most had left pale, shaken, or not at all. Orla spent days at a time with Dalna elders, trading stories in the low, flickering glow of oil lamps, learning the cadence of their speech, the pauses where their fear lived. She came to understand that the Whispering Dark was not only a physical presence, it was a cultural wound, an old scar on the collective memory of the planet. For generations, they had lived with the understanding that certain places, certain hours, did not belong to them. That after the sun's light slipped away, there were voices better left unanswered. The Jedi set up outposts on the forest edge, careful to avoid the oldest root systems where the locals swore the darkness pooled. Nights were measured in shifts, so that no sentry would be alone when the silence fell. Even so, there were incidents. A Padawan named Delny was found outside the perimeter one dawn, barefoot and covered in fine dust from the caves. She had no memory of leaving her bunk, only a lingering warmth in her ear where something had whispered her name. Her training master insisted she rest, but Delny refused. She was convinced she had been called to something important. In the days that followed, similar incidents occurred. Tools left in the mess tent would turn up deep in the woods. Data pads went missing and reappeared with corrupted files filled with looping, nonsensical phrases. More than once, an entire camp awoke to find their supply crates rearranged in precise, spiraling patterns that mirrored symbols etched in the oldest cave walls. It was as if the Whispering Dark was testing them, probing their boundary edge, careful to avoid the oldest root systems where the locals swore the darkness pooled. Nights were measured in shifts, so that no sentry would be alone when the silence fell. Even so, there were incidents. A Padawan named Delny was found outside the perimeter one dawn, barefoot and covered in fine dust from the caves. She had no memory of leaving her bunk, only a lingering warmth in her ear where something had whispered her name. Her training master insisted she rest, but Delny refused. She was convinced she had been called to something important. In the days that followed, similar incidents occurred. On the tree line, one of the most chilling encounters came when a scouting party, led by Knight Tevon Mulry, ventured deeper than any had gone before. They carried no comms too easily scrambled underground. but a simple rope line tied between them for safety. The first signs of trouble came when the rope went slack in Tavon's hands. Though he could still see the glow of the next Jedi's lamp ahead, he tugged once, twice, and the light turned toward him. Except it was not the lamp of his companion. It was something else, glowing with a pale, cold radiance. And the moment Tavon looked at it, every voice in his mind went silent. When he came to, he was outside the cave, alone, the rope frayed cleanly as if cut by something impossibly sharp. Days had passed. No trace of his team was ever found. The council recalled him to Coruscant, but Tavon never truly left Dalna. He spent his final years sketching the light he'd seen, always from memory, always imperfect, as though the dark itself would not allow him to reproduce it fully. Among the Jedi who studied the phenomenon, there was a growing divide. Some believed the Whispering Dark was a manifestation of the Force, perhaps even tied to the same ancient currents that had given rise to the Leveler. Others argued it was no more connected to the Force than a black hole, dangerous, yes, but purely physical in its nature, a natural predator of perception and thought. The Jedi who studied the phenomenon, there was a growing divide. Some believed the Whispering Dark was a manifestation of the Force, perhaps even tied to the same ancient currents that had given rise to the Leveler. Others argued it was no more connected to the Force than a black hole, dangerous, yes, but purely physical in its nature, a natural predator of perception and thought. The Dalnans themselves had no such debate. To them, the dark was alive. It wanted, and what it wanted, it would take. Given time. Attempts to map the cave system with droids met with failure. Even when equipped with redundancies and shielded power cells, the machines returned, if they returned at all, with scrambled. The Jedi who studied the phenomenon, there was a growing divide. Some believed the Whispering Dark was a manifestation of the Force, perhaps even tied to the same ancient currents that had given rise to the Leveler. Others argued it was no more connected to the Force than a black hole, dangerous, yes, but purely physical in its nature, a natural predator of perception and thought. The Dalnans themselves had no such debate. To them, the dark was alive. It wanted, and what it wanted, it would take. Given time. Attempts to map the cave system with droids met with failure. Even when equipped with redundancies and shielded power cells, the machines returned, if they returned at all, with scrambled. The Jedi who studied the phenomenon, there was a growing divide. Some believed the Whispering Dark was a manifestation of the Force, perhaps even tied to the same ancient currents that had given rise to the Leveler. Others argued it was no more connected to the Force than a black hole, dangerous, yes, but purely physical in its nature, a natural predator of perception and thought. The Dalnans themselves had no such debate. To them, the dark was alive. It wanted, and what it wanted, it would take. Given time. Attempts to map the cave system with droids met with failure. Even when equipped with redundancies and shielded power cells, the machines returned, if they returned at all, with scrambled. To its touch, the debate is meaningless. The Whispering Dark is not a puzzle to be solved, but a truth to be respected, a reminder that not all knowledge is meant to be illuminated, and not all shadows are meant to be chased away. Even now, freighter pilots passing above Dalna in the quiet hours of the night report picking up faint comm signals on unused channels. Always the same, always a voice speaking just softly enough that the words can't quite be made out, and always, without fail, it knows their name. The Guardians of Yedda's Veil were not merely keepers of a tradition. They were the living skin of a wound in the galaxy's history, standing between the known and the unspoken, between the light of the Force and the darkness that clung to its edges like frost. Long before the Empire turned Jeddah into a scarred moon, and long before the High Republic's golden banners fluttered across its stone avenues, Jeddah had been a place of convergence, a spiritual compass for Force believers of every creed, sect, and philosophy. The Jedi were not its sole shepherds, nor were they ever meant to be. The city's sacred mantle was shared by orders as old and as stubborn as the first stones of the temple itself. At the heart of this tapestry stood the Guardians of the Wills, an order not sworn to the Jedi Code nor to the Republic, but to the deeper truth they called the Veil. The Veil, to them, was not a metaphor. It was a real thing, an unseen membrane between the living galaxy and the endless current of the Force. It could thin, stretch, and in rare moments, tear. And when it did, things slipped through. Some were visions. Some were truths not yet ready to be understood. Others were not meant for the minds of mortals at all. The Guardian's task was to watch these thin places, to guard the passages, and to ensure that nothing crossing the veil in either direction went unnoticed during the High Republic era. The Jedi viewed the Guardians with a mixture of respect and wary distance. The Guardians' faith was not bound to Kyber crystals or the measured recitations of the Jedi Code. They believed that all who touched the Force, even unknowingly, carried a shard of its will. To them, a spice runner might hold wisdom the Jedi could overlook, just as a Sith acolyte might unwittingly speak a truth the Jedi refused to hear. It was this refusal to take sides in the endless light versus dark war that made the Guardians both invaluable and unpredictable. One of their central duties during this period was to maintain the Vault of Eversight, an underground chamber carved into the moon's bedrock, its entrance hidden beneath the labyrinthine streets of Jeddah City. The vault was not filled with treasure in the conventional sense. Instead, it held scrolls, tablets, and crystalline memory rods recordings from dozens of Force sects scattered across the galaxy. Each artifact was a fragment of understanding, preserved not for use, but for balance. Knowledge without a keeper, the Guardians believed, is knowledge without a conscience. The Jedi came often to petition access to certain records, especially those dealing with precognition, ancient prophecies, or visions of galactic-scale events. But the Guardians of the Veil were not quick to grant such requests. Every retrieval required not only a formal plea, but a ritual in which the Jedi would sit in silent meditation beside the Keeper of the Hourglass. The Keeper would invert the hourglass, an ancient relic filled with the dust of Jeddah's first Kyber mines, and let the grains fall. Only when the final grain touched the lower chamber could the Keeper decide if the petition was worthy. Knowledge without a keeper, the Guardians believed, is knowledge without a conscience. The Jedi came often to petition access to certain records, especially those dealing with precognition, ancient prophecies, or visions of galactic-scale events. But the Guardians of the Veil were not quick to grant such requests. Every retrieval required not only a formal plea, but a ritual in which the Jedi would sit in silent meditation beside the Keeper of the Hourglass. The Keeper would invert the hourglass, an ancient relic filled with the dust of Jeddah's first Kyber mines, and let the grains fall. Only when the final grain touched the lower chamber could the keeper decide if the petition was worthy. There were cases where the hourglass was turned again and again, without a word, until the Jedi left empty, dash-handed Dot. It was during one of these tense intervals that whispers began to circulate in the streets of Jeddah about the veil thinning. Pilgrims claimed that in the quiet hours before dawn, the temple's shadow stretched unnaturally far, almost to the edge of the city walls. Some said they had seen shapes moving within that shadow, not people, not droids, but outlines that shifted as if made of liquid darkness. The Guardians took the reports seriously. They had records of similar phenomena from centuries past, and each time it had preceded an event that rippled through the Force like a tremor, a slow, deliberate tug from beneath the temple's foundation. He likened it to the sensation of a door being opened in a room you didn't know existed. When they investigated, they found no physical breach, but the Force was wrong there, heavier. Colors in the air felt muted, as if light itself was hesitant to linger around. This time, Jedi historian Orus Fan arrived from Coruscant, armed with authorization from the Council to access the Vault of Eversight. His mission to cross-reference old Guardian records with reports of an artifact the Jedi called the Shadow Lens, an ancient focusing crystal said to magnify not light, but absence. The Guardians allowed him access, but only under the condition that he could not copy or remove anything. What Orus found disturbed him deeply, not because of what was written, but because of what wasn't. Several records from the same era as the Shadow Lens's supposed creation had been meticulously erased, leaving only blank scrolls. The keeper of the hourglass told Orus that this was the Veil's will, that some knowledge, once recorded, could not be allowed to remain fixed in the galaxy's memory. Orus protested, arguing that the Jedi could protect the knowledge, but the Keeper only shook his head. "You think protection means possession," he said. "We protect by letting go." Tensions escalated when a group of Nihil agents disguised as traders infiltrated Jeddah during the Festival of Balance. Their goal was not to attack openly, but to breach the vault and retrieve an item known in their own fragmented lore as the Silent Key. The Guardians met them in the streets, not with blades drawn. "You think protection means possession," he said. "We protect by letting go." Tensions escalated when a group of Nihil agents disguised as traders infiltrated Jeddah during the Festival of Balance. Their goal was not to attack openly, but to breach the vault and retrieve an item known in their own fragmented lore as the Silent Key. The Guardians met them in the streets, not with blades drawn, but with a tide of bodies. Every alley seemed to produce another robed figure, silent, immovable. The Nihil were forced into the open, and only then did the Jedi intervene, driving them back into the desert wastes. But with a tide of bodies. Every alley seemed to produce another robed figure, silent, immovable. The Nihil were forced into the open, and only then did the Jedi intervene, driving them back into the desert wastes. Pilgrims arriving on Jeddah found the temple's great gates sealed, its plazas eerily empty. The Guardians had withdrawn entirely, conducting some unnamed ritual within. A few days later, when the gates reopened, the veil was said to have mended. The strange shadows vanished. The air felt lighter, but the vault's entrance was sealed with a new barrier, a slab of kyber-infused stone inscribed with symbols no Jedi alive could translate. When asked what had been done, the keeper of the hourglass replied only, "The veil has been stitched, But every stitch is a promise, and promises can be broken. Some say the Guardians still walk the circumference of the temple at night, carrying crystals that glow faintly with a light that is neither wholly natural nor wholly of the Force. Others claim that the vault's contents were moved entirely, hidden somewhere beyond the reach of even hyperspace navigation. Whatever the truth, the Guardians of Jedha's Veil remain exactly as they have always been present, watchful and quietly reminding the galaxy that not all doors should be opened and not all light should be shown. The vanished Jedi outposts were never meant to be legends. They were meant to be anchors, physical waypoints of the Jedi's reach across the farthest corners of the High Republic's map. Built on lonely moons, hidden asteroids, or planets so wild that even the Republic's star charts barely acknowledged them, these outposts existed not as military fortresses, but as seeds of connection. A Jedi outpost was supposed to be a beacon for lost travelers, a place for negotiation with distant cultures, and a sanctuary for any being in need. Each was staffed with only a handful of knights or Padawans, supported by a small corps of healers, engineers, and archivists. They were not designed to be self-sufficient citadels. They were living bridges. And yet, in the final decades of the High Republic's golden era, a strange pattern emerged. One by one, these bridges began to vanish. At first, it seemed like nothing more than the natural churn of the outer rim. Outposts were abandoned or relocated all the time due to shifting trade routes, political disputes, or environmental hazards. But the disappearances began to carry an unnerving sameness. Communication lines would fall silent without warning. Supply ships would arrive to find the structure intact but eerily empty, the gardens overgrown, the databank scrubbed of all transmissions from the last standard month. In several cases, food was still laid out in the mess hall, as if the occupants had simply stood up mid-meal and walked away. The Jedi Council investigated quietly. Wary of sparking panic, reports trickled back, each more unsettling than the last. From Outpost Tareth in the Gali Expanse, a lone knight named Evis Kor returned, gaunt and trembling, his memories fractured. He claimed the Force itself had gone silent on the night the others vanished. His last clear recollection was of hearing a deep, resonant hum like the sound of a kyber crystal resonating in a cave, followed by the sensation of being submerged in ice-cold water. Then nothing. Similar testimonies emerged from the few survivors of other vanishings. None of them could explain how they had escaped when all others had disappeared. They spoke of sudden pressure in the air, of shadows stretching too far along the walls, of hearing voices they recognized fellow Jedi, calling their names only to find no one there. Some reported flashes of alien architecture in their visions, structures that felt impossibly old, built for beings far taller than any human or Wukai. These fragments led some in the Order to suspect the involvement of ancient Force cults or even pre-Republic civilizations. One theory, quietly passed among the Jedi Archives' more conspiratorial historians, linked the vanishings to the mysterious Leveler and the nameless creatures known for their ability to strip the Force from their victims, leaving them lifeless husks. But the signs didn't fully align. At the sites of the vanished outposts, there were no bodies, no signs of attack, no physical decay matched the Leveler's touch. Whatever happened to these Jedi and their companions left no trace of death, only absence. In an attempt to understand the pattern, the Council dispatched Master Dren Valas, a cartographer knight whose expertise lay in mapping hyperspace anomalies. He began to notice something strange. Every vanished outpost had been located within a specific hyperspatial drift corridor, a region where starship navigation required constant recalibration due to gravitational disturbances from nearby uncharted masses. Pilots had long avoided these areas except when guided by beacons. Vala suspected that something or someone was using the drift corridors as cover for targeted incursions. His search brought him to the edge of the occlusion zone, a cluster of unexplored star systems beyond which even the most advanced navicomputers refused to calculate a stable course. There he found what might have been the remnants of an outpost, a single docking spire protruding from an asteroid surface, its lower half sheared clean away as if it had been ripped from its foundation. The docking logs were gone, but on one abandoned Padawan's datapad, Valas found a final, half-corrupted entry. "It's here. It's under us." The veil, the rest was static dot. Rumors began to swirl among outer rim spaces, whispers of a silent fleet, seen drifting at the edge of unlit space. Ships shaped like elongated spires, gliding without thrusters, never broadcasting identification. Some swore they had seen figures on the hulls, unmoving and hooded, as if part of the ship itself. Others claimed the ships disappeared the moment you tried to scan them, leaving only a faint, lingering distortion in your sensors. The disappearances were not confined to Jedi alone. In at least 2 cases, Republic relay stations near the affected regions also went dark. Half-corrupted entry. "It's here. It's under us." The veil, the rest was static dot. Rumors began to swirl among outer rim spaces, whispers of a silent fleet, seen drifting at the edge of unlit space. Ships shaped like elongated spires, gliding without thrusters, never broadcasting identification. Some swore they had seen figures on the hulls, unmoving and hooded, as if part of the ship itself. Others claimed the ships disappeared the moment you tried to scan them, leaving only a faint, lingering distortion in your sensors. The disappearances were not confined to Jedi alone. In at least 2 cases, Republic relay stations near the affected regions also went dark. Half-corrupted entry. "It's here. It's under us." The veil, the rest was static dot. Rumors began to swirl among outer rim spaces, whispers of a silent fleet, seen drifting at the edge of unlit space. Ships shaped like elongated spires, gliding without thrusters, never broadcasting identification. Some swore they had seen figures on the hulls, unmoving and hooded, as if part of the ship itself. Others claimed the ships disappeared the moment you tried to scan them, leaving only a faint, lingering distortion in your sensors. The disappearances were not confined to Jedi alone. In at least 2 cases, Republic relay stations near the affected regions also went dark, at the edge of unlit space. Ships shaped like elongated spires, gliding without thrusters, never broadcasting identification. Some swore they had seen figures on the hulls, unmoving and hooded, as if part of the ship itself. Others claimed the ships disappeared the moment you tried to scan them, leaving only a faint, lingering distortion in your sensors. The disappearances were not confined to Jedi alone. In at least 2 cases, Republic relay stations near the affected regions also went dark, their crews never found. Yet the Jedi losses were the most keenly felt, because each outpost was not just a building, it was a living point of contact between the Order and the people of the frontier. Without them, certain worlds reverted to isolation, cutting themselves off from the Republic entirely. Trade routes that once depended on Jedi mediation became hotbeds of piracy. Negotiations with independent systems dissolved into conflict. The galaxy did not just lose structures, it lost trust. Master Kola Nirin, a historian stationed on Coruscant, argued that the vanishings were not random acts of violence. but a strategic campaign to sever the Jedi from their roots in the Outer Rim. To have docked with what looked like a derelict station drifting between systems, only to find its corridors fully lit, stocked with supplies and echoing with faint, distant footsteps. He fled before discovering the source dot. In later centuries, fragments of Jedi records heavily redacted would reference a term never fully explained: the gathered outposts. Some scholars believe this referred to a secret relocation program where endangered sites were moved to hidden locations via experimental hyperspace jumps. Others argue it was a euphemism for something far stranger, that the outposts had been drawn somewhere, gathered into the fold of an unknown presence waiting beyond the edge of charted reality. Whatever the truth, the vanished Jedi outposts remain one of the High Republic's most enduring mysteries. They stand as silent absences in the Order's history, not destroyed, not conquered, but taken. And if Master Nareen's warning was right, then those absences were not merely losses. They were seeds, planted in the dark, waiting to grow. The Nihil's hidden strongholds were nothing like the Jedi's outposts, nothing like the neat, symmetrical bastions of the Republic. They weren't meant to inspire hope, they were meant to choke it. When the High Republic first heard the name Nihil, most assumed they were just another band of Outer Rim marauders, violent, yes, but disorganized, destined to burn out like all the rest. They were wrong. The Nihil were chaos wrapped in strategy, a storm given form by their leader, Marchion Ro. They did not plant their flag in one fortress and defend it. They vanished into the cracks of the galaxy, spreading their lairs like spores in every shadow the Republic forgot to light. These were not cities, not military bases, but shifting strongholds, deliberately ugly, deliberately wrong. They were wrong. The Nihil were chaos wrapped in strategy, a storm given form by their leader, Marchion Ro. They did not plant their flag in one fortress and defend it. They vanished into the cracks of the galaxy, spreading their lairs like spores in every shadow the Republic forgot to light. These were not cities, not military bases, but shifting strongholds, deliberately ugly, deliberately wrong, that seemed to sprout where the fabric of order had already begun to rot. Their locations were secrets even to most of their own. The Nihil divided their domains into loosely connected tempests, each commanded by a ruthless tempest runner who answered only to Ro. Inside the corpse of a spacefaring Leviathan, its ribcage turned into docking arms and its hollowed skull housing a throne room stinking of oil and ozone. The key to their elusiveness was the path. The Nihil possessed stolen, forbidden hyperspace routes that no Republic navigator could predict, handed down through Marchion Ro's secret lineage and manipulated to ensure they could appear anywhere and vanish just as quickly. These routes allowed their strongholds to shift not physically, but in the sense that no Republic fleet could approach without finding the entry path twisted away from them like a maze that redrew itself. The Nihil were never cornered. They were the corner. Those who stumbled across a stronghold by accident rarely lived to tell the tale. The Nihil didn't just defend their lairs with weapons, they defended them with atmosphere. Every stronghold was a labyrinth of traps, narrow corridors with pressurized changes that could crush a body in seconds. Walls that bled toxic gas on command, magnetic fields that could rip weapons from your hands, hallways bent at impossible angles, some leading back to the same place you'd entered, others ending in sudden drops into ship-breaking pits. To outsiders, these places were nightmares made solid. To the Nihil, they were home. The Republic's first real brush with the scope of these strongholds came after the disaster at Hetzal, when Jedi Knight Keeve Trennis led a small strike team on a hunt for a captured Republic envoy. Their search brought them to a derelict station in the Griswold Belt. From the outside, it looked abandoned, hull scorched, antenna arrays snapped like brittle twigs. But once inside, they found the corridors humming with low, constant power, the lights flickering with purpose, not decay. They followed faint traces of life deeper into the belly of the structure, only to find themselves separated by shifting blast doors and cut off from their own ships. By the time they fought their way back out, the Nihil had moved the prisoners through one of their hidden hyperspace routes, and the station was already in the process of self-destructing. Marchion Ro's personal stronghold was the most feared and least understood of all. Known to only a handful of his closest lieutenants, it was whispered to be part shrine, part war machine, a place where stolen artifacts from Jedi temples were kept alongside ancient weapons from forgotten wars. Ro did not hide in the same place for long, but when he did settle somewhere, he made sure the very air and hyperspace routes, and the station was already in the process of self-destructing. Marchion Ro's personal stronghold was the most feared and least understood of all. Known to only a handful of his closest lieutenants, it was whispered to be part shrine, part war machine, a place where stolen artifacts from hyperspace routes, and the station was already in the process of self-destructing. Marchion Ro's personal stronghold was the most feared and least understood of all. Known to only a handful of his closest lieutenants, it was whispered to be part shrine, part war machine, a place where stolen artifacts from flow of molten rock, visible only for the few moments when the lava cooled, and only if you knew exactly where to look. The Nihil were not content to simply hide and wait. Their strongholds were breeding grounds for indoctrination, where new recruits were broken down and reforged in the image of the storm. The walls were plastered with trophies from raids helmets, banners, even lightsabers from fallen Jedi, all displayed not as prizes, but as warnings. In the mess halls, the air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, engine grease, and the bitter tang of Nihil brew. Songs roared out over clanging metal tables, telling and retelling the same violent victories until they became truth. For the Jedi, discovering a Nihil stronghold was only the first step. Surviving it was another matter entirely. Many missions ended in retreat, not because the Jedi lacked skill, but because the strongholds themselves were built to break the will. The Force felt strange in those places, muffled as if wrapped in cloth, threaded with echoes of fear and pain. Some knights swore that in certain chambers they could hear faint whispers urging them to turn on their allies. In time, the Republic Senate demanded a full campaign to root out these dens, but they underestimated the scale of the challenge. Every time a Nihil lair was destroyed, 3 more seemed to spring up elsewhere. The storm was fluid. Adaptive, it could never be pinned down. Even after the fall of the High Republic, some claim the Nihil's strongholds remained active, operating in deep space where no law dared to follow. Smugglers told of derelict stations that suddenly roared to life when approached, or asteroid fields that shifted course to swallow intruders whole. The Nihil may have been driven into hiding, but hiding was where they had always been strongest. In the end, The true danger of the Nihil's hidden strongholds wasn't their firepower, their traps, or even their secrecy. It was their philosophy that safety is an illusion and that the galaxy's order is nothing more than a thin shell waiting to crack. By existing in the cracks, they proved their point over and over. And as long as the galaxy had shadows, the Nihil would have a place to build. The most unsettling thing about the Nihil's hidden strongholds was that they were never truly gone only waiting. The Republic might destroy one, clear out the wreckage, plant a flag, and claim victory. But somewhere in the galaxy, the same walls were being rebuilt, the same traps reset, the same chaos refitted to a new location. Part of their endurance came from the storm ship fleets. These weren't simply vessels of war. They were mobile extensions of the strongholds themselves. A single flagship could carry entire prefabricated sections of a base armored corridors, docking bays, living quarters designed to be deployed like blocks onto a planetary surface or linked to an abandoned station. This meant that any quiet corner of the galaxy could become a Nihil lair in days, sometimes hours. Where the Republic relied on permanent structures, the Nihil relied on impermanence, the ability to move, adapt, and vanish before their enemies even understood the scale of the threat. Marchion Ro, more than any of his Tempest runners, understood the psychological power of this. These weren't simply vessels of war. They were mobile extensions of the strongholds themselves. A single flagship could carry entire prefabricated sections of a base armored corridors, docking bays, living quarters designed to be deployed like blocks onto a planetary surface or linked to an abandoned station. This meant that any quiet corner of the galaxy could become a Nihil lair in days, sometimes hours. Where the Republic relied on permanent structures, the Nihil relied on impermanence, the ability to move, adapt, and vanish before their enemies even understood the scale of the threat. Marchion Ro, more than any of his Tempest runners, understood the psychological power of this. His personal doctrine was simple. The Republic could never feel safe if the storm could fall on them from anywhere. To maintain that fear, he deliberately kept a uniform built from scratch to disorient intruders with identical doors, echoing floors, and repeating turns that made every path feel the same. The further one ventured toward the command chamber, the more the air felt weighted not just by the mechanical hum of the stronghold, but by a pervasive sense of being watched. The command centers were rarely grand in the traditional sense. Unlike the Senate's shining halls or the Jedi Council's serene chambers, these rooms were dim and utilitarian, built for quick evacuation rather than ceremonial presence. A single reinforced chair, often welded directly into the deck, served as the seat of authority. Around it, makeshift hollow projectors cast grainy blue images of battle maps, hyperspace lanes, and potential raid targets. Even more chilling were the trophy halls. Here, the Nihil displayed their most prized captures not to honor them, but to mock them. Lightsabers hung alongside shredded Jedi cloaks. Senate medallions melted into grotesque shapes. Banners from defeated planetary militias burned and tattered under harsh spotlights. Recruits were marched through these halls during initiation, the displays serving as both warning and inspiration. It told them the Nihil had faced the galaxy's best, and the galaxy's best had bled. The most impenetrable strongholds weren't always in deep space. Some were hidden in planetary terrain so hostile it was its own defense. On the frozen moon of Dera 5, an ice fissure wide enough to swallow a cruiser concealed a hangar where storm ships rested in perfect rows, their engines kept warm by geothermal vents. On the jungle world of Tholoth Prime, a stronghold existed entirely beneath the canopy, its durasteel roof camouflaged with living moss and vines. Visible only in fleeting glimpses from above. Access required threading through natural river tunnels that twisted in complete darkness. Tunnels that the Nihil had mined with enough charges to bury the entire base in seconds if compromised. Rumors persisted of a stronghold built into the wreckage of a Lucrehulk battleship from the Clone Wars. Said to drift in the maw, the same unstable region of space that had swallowed entire fleets, this lair supposedly bristled with salvaged separatist weapons. The Nihil didn't need the firepower. The mere idea that such a fortress might exist was enough to draw bounty hunters and Republic scouts into the maw, none of whom ever returned. One of the most disturbing, visible only in fleeting glimpses from above. Access required threading through natural river tunnels that twisted in complete darkness. Tunnels that the Nihil had mined with enough charges to bury the entire base in seconds if compromised. Rumors persisted of a stronghold built into the wreckage of a Lucrehulk battleship from the Clone Wars. Said to drift in the maw, the same unstable region of space that had swallowed entire fleets, this lair supposedly bristled with salvaged separatist weapons. The Nihil didn't need the firepower. The mere idea that such a fortress might exist was enough to draw bounty hunters and Republic scouts into the maw, none of whom ever returned. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Nihil's infrastructure was their use of ghost strongholds. These were decoy bases, often in plain sight, meant to lure enemies into wasting resources. Aspects of the Nihil's infrastructure was their use of ghost strongholds. These were decoy bases, often in plain sight, meant to lure enemies into wasting resources on assaults that achieved nothing. Sometimes these ghosts were manned by only a handful of expendable raiders. Other times they were completely automated, run by droid systems that mimicked human activity. A Jedi strike team might as specialized Jedi teams were trained to read the hyperspace signatures that hinted at path usage, hoping to follow the Nihil home. But the storm's nature made this nearly impossible the moment a Jedi ship locked onto the route. The Nihil could alter it, sending pursuers into dead systems or straight into uncharted hazards. Even when the Order succeeded in pinpointing a stronghold's location, the battle often ended with the Nihil abandoning the site mid-fight, leaving behind nothing but booby traps and a lingering sense of futility. Over time, the legend of the Nihil's hidden strongholds took on a life of its own. Traders swapped exaggerated tales in cantinas of asteroid lairs guarded by sentient lightning storms, of space stations where the halls shifted in endless loops, of bases that were actually living creatures, swallowing intruders whole. The truth was that reality needed little embellishment. The Nihil's genius lay in making sure of bases that were actually living creatures, swallowing intruders whole. The truth was that reality needed little embellishment. The Nihil's genius lay in making sure no one knew where reality ended and nightmare began. It was this blurring of truth and myth that allowed them to survive far longer than the Republic ever anticipated. Even in the rare instances when the Order claimed to have destroyed a major stronghold, whispers would spread within weeks of another sighting, a familiar silhouette in a sensor sweep, a fragment of a stormship hull turning up in a scrapyard light years away. The galaxy began to believe as the Nihil wanted them to. No one knew where reality ended and nightmare began. It was this blurring of truth and myth that allowed them to survive far longer than the Republic ever anticipated. Even in the rare instances when the Order claimed to have destroyed a major stronghold, whispers would spread within weeks of another sighting, a familiar silhouette in a sensor sweep, a fragment of a stormship hull turning up in a scrapyard light years away. The galaxy began to believe, as the Nihil wanted them to, that the storm could never truly be stopped. For the Jedi who had faced them, that was the hardest truth to swallow. A fortress you could destroy, a battle you could win. But how do you destroy something that lives in the gaps between your victories? How do you end a war against an enemy whose home is the absence of light? By the closing years of the High Republic era, the Senate began to focus less on destroying the strongholds outright and more on controlling the hyperspace lanes that fed them. It was a desperate gamble cut off the Nihil's mobility, and their lairs might wither. But even then, Marchion Ro seemed 3 steps ahead, shifting his strongholds to places where the galaxy itself served. The Republic itself had fully taken shape. The Jedi had learned a painful truth that the heart of their Order's strength, the Kyber crystal, was both a gift and a temptation. These crystals, luminous and alive in ways that defied all natural law, were attuned to the Force in a manner no other mineral could match. In the right hands, they could focus the energy of the Force into a blade of pure light, the very essence of the Jedi's weapon and philosophy. In the wrong hands, they could be twisted into tools of destruction on a scale too great to imagine. The earliest archives from Jeddah spoke of entire wars fought over Kyber, long before the Sith and Jedi knew each other by name. Primitive empires tried to carve these living gems from the sacred caves and mount them in crude energy projectors, hoping to wield the same power they had seen in wandering Force adepts. More than once, these attempts ended in disaster, the unstable amplification tearing cities apart, the crystals themselves shattering in violent feedback that scarred the land for centuries. These events left a lasting mark on the Jedi psyche. Kyber was not a mere resource, it was a sacred trust. And so, the first Kyber vaults were established, not on the busy temple world of Coruscant, not in the open markets of Jedha, but in places where the Force ran deep and the galaxy's maps ran thin. These vaults were more than storage, they were sanctuaries, each built into the living fabric of the Force itself. One was said to lie in the frozen caves of Ilum, its walls glittering with millions of uncut crystals, the air so still you could hear the hum of the Force resonating through the ice. Another was hidden deep beneath the green oceans of Gli Anselm, protected by the currents and the song of aquatic Force sensitives who guarded its gates for generations. Each vault was unique, tailored to the nature of the crystals it held. Some Kyber sang in high, piercing tones, others pulsed with deep, thunderous rhythms. The Jedi learned to build their sanctuaries in harmony with these vibrations so that the structures themselves resonated with the living chorus. Visitors described walking through these halls as entering a dreamlight, refracting through faceted walls, shadows rippling like water, the sound of the Force thrumming in your bones. The largest and most legendary of these sanctuaries came to be known simply as the Great Kyber Vaults. They were not a single location, but a network, a carefully hidden chain of repositories scattered across the galaxy, each linked to the others through encoded hyperspace routes known only to a handful of Jedi lore keepers. These vaults housed not only uncut Kyber, but ancient saber crystals passed down from masters long returned to the Force, shards of rare singing kyber that resonated at multiple frequencies, and even corrupted crystals that had been purified through the mysterious process the Jedi called healing. But the kyber vaults served a purpose beyond safeguarding the crystals themselves. They were also where the Order kept its most sensitive research on the nature of kyber and its connection to the Force. Entire wings were devoted to studying the way these living stones chose their wielders, how their colors shifted with the wielder's path, and how some rare crystals like the mythical darksabers defied all known rules. Not all who came to the vaults were Jedi. On rare occasions, trusted artisans from other worlds, lightsaber smiths from Obroa Sky, crystal shapers from Christophsis were granted entry to assist in restoration or study. These visitors often left changed. Their understanding of the galaxy deepened, their sense of the sacred expanded. Many never spoke of what they saw, fearing that putting such wonders into words might diminish them. Still, the vaults were not impregnable. History records more than one attempt to breach them and more than one catastrophe that followed. The Sith, in their earliest incarnations, sought kyber for its raw destructive potential. Their warlords targeted vaults during their crusades, stripping them bare to forge superweapons powered by enslaved crystals. In the Old Republic era, the infamous Red Harvest saw an entire vault on Malachor consumed when a corrupted kyber shard destabilized its siblings, causing an explosion that left the surface a wasteland of jagged stone and frozen lightning dot. To protect against such threats, the Jedi wove layer upon layer of defense into the vaults. Some were physical blast doors of frick alloy, pressure-sealed chambers, environmental hazards tuned to repel intruders. Others were more esoteric. On Ilum, the main vault's threshold was guarded by a Force resonance lock, a harmonic barrier that could only be opened by aligning one's presence in the Force with the song of the crystals inside. On Jeddah, the vault's corridors shifted like a maze to those with ill intent, turning them back upon themselves until they either left or collapsed from exhaustion. Legends whisper that some vaults had guardians not droids or Jedi, but beings born of the kyber itself. Shimmering entities of light and sound, they appeared only to those who sought the crystals for selfish purposes, their voices like ringing chimes that could drive the unworthy to madness. Whether these guardians were real or simply allegories woven into Jedi teaching, the fact remains. None who claim to have seen them ever succeeded in leaving with a crystal dot. During the High Republic era, the vaults took on an even greater significance. As hyperspace lanes expanded and the Republic's reach grew, the number of Jedi and the number of lightsabers increased. More younglings meant more kyber needed to be found, shaped, and bonded. Yet at the same time, new threats emerged. The Nihil, with their uncanny ability to strike anywhere via the paths, posed a danger unlike any the Order had faced in centuries. Rumors spread that Marchion Ro sought not only to destroy Jedi, but to corrupt the very crystals they relied on. Some in the Council feared he had already located at least one vault dot. In response, the Jedi began relocating certain caches, splitting shipments among multiple vaults to ensure that no single breach could cripple the Order. This was a dangerous move. Every relocation risked exposure, and hyperspace travel with raw kyber was notoriously unstable. Yet the alternative, leaving too many crystals in one place, was unthinkable. Among the most haunting mysteries of the Great Kyber Vaults is the fate of the so-called Silent Vault. Said to have been the largest in the network, This vault was constructed in the shadow of a dying star, its walls carved from the crystallized remains of supernova debris. For centuries, it served as both a storehouse and a pilgrimage site for Jedi seeking to meditate on the impermanence of all things. Then, without warning, it went dark. No hyperspace beacon, no communication. When a small Jedi team finally reached the location decades later, they found nothing but empty space. The vault itself was gone, as if it had never existed. Some believe it was moved. Others whisper it slipped into another plane of the Force entirely. In the present day, the Great Kyber vaults remain one of the Order's most closely guarded secrets. Even in the age of the New Republic, many have been lost to time, their locations wiped from memory to prevent them from falling into dangerous hands. A few have been rediscovered by wandering Force sensitives, who often describe the experience as being called home by the crystals themselves. Whether these rediscoveries are accidents or the will of the Force remains a question no one can answer. One thing, however, is certain. As long as the Jedi endure, the Great Kyber vaults will endure with them. They are more than mere safes for rare stones. They are repositories of trust, of tradition, of the living bond between the Jedi and the Force. And though they may be hidden in the furthest reaches of the galaxy, their hum can be felt by those who know how to listen, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always light waiting to be kindled. Echoes in the Force was the name given by the Jedi to something they could never truly define, a phenomenon that slipped between history, memory, and the living current of the Force itself. It was not a single place or a single event. It was a resonance, a lingering imprint left behind by moments so charged with the Force that they became more than memory. When Jedi Masters spoke of them to younglings, they would say, "The past does not die in the Force. It hums, and if you listened closely enough, you could hear it." Some echoes were tied to locations, the Great Kyber vaults, the ruins of ancient temples, battlefield. It hums, and if you listened closely enough, you could hear it. Some echoes were tied to locations, the Great Kyber vaults, the ruins of ancient temples, battlefields where Jedi and Sith had clashed in storms of light and shadow. Step into such a place, and the air would feel thick, charged with something you could not see. Voices might seem to whisper from nowhere, or the faint sound of ignited sabers might ring out in the stillness. These were not ghosts, not in the way the uninitiated imagined. They were the Force replaying itself, like ripples returning to the shore long after the stone had been thrown. Others existed in objects, where Jedi and Sith had clashed in storms of light and shadow. Step into such a place, and the air would feel thick, charged with something you could not see. Voices might seem to whisper from nowhere, or the faint sound of ignited sabers might ring out in the stillness. These were not ghosts, not in the way the uninitiated imagined. They were the Force replaying itself, like ripples returning to the shore long after the stone had been thrown. Others existed in objects, where Jedi and Sith had clashed in storms of light and shadow. Step into such a place, and the air would feel thick, charged with something you could not see. Voices might seem to whisper from nowhere, or the faint sound of ignited sabers might ring out in the stillness. These were not ghosts, not in the way the uninitiated imagined. They were the Force replaying itself, like ripples returning to the shore long after the stone had been thrown. Others existed in objects, A lightsaber passed down through generations might carry more than craftsmanship. It might hold the echo of every battle it had seen, every hand that had gripped its hilt. Jedi who attuned themselves deeply could sometimes feel these stories flashes of emotion, bursts of color, moments of triumph or regret. Some scholars of the High Republic likened it to the way music clings to an instrument. The notes fade, but the wood remembers the song. And then there were the living echoes, not in places, not in things, but in people. Force sensitives who carried within them the faint impressions of those who had come before. A lightsaber passed down through generations might carry more than craftsmanship. It might hold the echo of every battle it had seen, every hand that had gripped its hilt. Jedi who attuned themselves deeply could sometimes feel these stories flashes of emotion, bursts of color, moments of triumph or regret. Some scholars of the High Republic likened it to the way music clings to an instrument. The notes fade, but the wood remembers the song. And then there were the living echoes, not in places, not in things, but in people. Force sensitives who carried within them the faint impressions of those who had come before. Where Jedi and Sith had clashed in storms of light and shadow. Step into such a place, and the air would feel thick, charged with something you could not see. Voices might seem to whisper from nowhere, or the faint sound of ignited sabers might ring out in the stillness. These were not ghosts, not in the way the uninitiated imagined. They were the Force replaying itself, like ripples returning to the shore long after the stone had been thrown. Others existed in objects. A lightsaber passed down through generations might carry more than craftsmanship. It might hold the echo of every battle it had seen, every hand that had gripped its hilt. Jedi who attuned themselves deeply could sometimes feel these stories flashes of emotion, bursts of color, moments of triumph or regret. Some scholars of the High Republic likened it to the way music clings to an instrument. The notes fade, but the wood remembers the song. And then there were the living echoes, not in places, not in things, but in people. Force sensitives who carried within them the faint impressions of those who had come before. A lightsaber passed down through generations might carry more than craftsmanship. It might hold the echo of every battle it had seen, every hand that had gripped its hilt. Jedi who attuned themselves deeply could sometimes feel these stories flashes of emotion, bursts of color, moments of triumph or regret. Some scholars of the High Republic likened it to the way music clings to an instrument. The notes fade, but the wood remembers the song. And then there were the living echoes, not in places, not in things, but in people. Force sensitives who carried within them the faint impressions of those who had come before. The words came with the image of a towering, eyeless creature standing in a storm of swirling dust, its outline barely visible against the void. At the time, the vision was dismissed as metaphor, perhaps a warning about overextending into dangerous regions. But when the Nameless began their attacks years later, those who had experienced the echo knew exactly what they were seeing. The shadow had not been a metaphor. It had been a memory of something yet to return. For some Jedi, echoes became a personal calling, wayseekers. Jedi who traveled without direct orders from the Council often made it their mission to seek out these resonant sites, meditating until the Force offered them something to carry forward. They believed that following echoes was like following a trail left by the Force itself. Their journals filled with sketches and transcribed impressions, became treasured resources in the archives, consulted when new mysteries arose. The danger, of course, was in chasing echoes too far. It was possible to become lost in them, to mistake the past for the present, or to act on visions without understanding their context. There were cases of Jedi who pursued an echo's call only to vanish entirely, their disappearance becoming another echo whispered about by future generations. Even so, the Jedi understood that to ignore the echoes was to close one's ears to the galaxy's own memory. In every council chamber, in every temple, there were quiet spaces. The Jedi understood that to ignore the echoes was to close one's ears to the galaxy's own memory. In every council chamber, in every temple, there were quiet spaces where Jedi could sit and simply listen. Sometimes they heard nothing. Other times they emerged pale and wide-eyed, holding a scrap of truth that had been waiting for centuries to be heard. Perhaps that was the greatest mystery of all, whether the echoes were simply the Force remembering itself, or whether they were the Force speaking directly to those who could carry its will forward. To the Jedi of the High Republic, it did not matter. They listened anyway, for in the stillness between stars, the Force did not forget, and neither could they. In the vast stillness of the Jedi Archives, night fall, the Jedi understood that to ignore the echoes was to close one's ears to the galaxy's own memory. In every council chamber, in every temple, there were quiet spaces where Jedi could sit and simply listen. Sometimes they heard nothing. Other times they emerged pale and wide-eyed, holding a scrap of truth that had been waiting for centuries to be heard. Perhaps that was the greatest mystery of all, whether the echoes were simply the Force remembering itself, or whether they were the Force speaking directly to those who could carry its will forward. To the Jedi of the High Republic, it did not matter. Jedi could sit and simply listen. Sometimes they heard nothing. Other times they emerged pale and wide-eyed, holding a scrap of truth that had been waiting for centuries to be heard. Perhaps that was the greatest mystery of all, whether the echoes were simply the Force remembering itself, or whether they were the Force speaking directly to those who could carry its will forward. To the Jedi of the High Republic, it did not matter. They listened anyway, for in the stillness between stars, the Force did not forget, and neither could they. In the vast stillness of the Jedi Archives, night falls without fanfare. The halls do not dim entirely. Soft golden light glows from alcoves and reading tables, painting the towering shelves in warm shadows. The archivist droids hum quietly to themselves, locking away fragile holocrons and sealing the day's records. Outside the great windows, Coruscant's skyline blurs into 1,000 glittering threads, each speeder light a story racing through the city's veins. But here, within the temple's heart, time slows to a crawl. Even contradictions were welcomed, because the Force itself was layered with paradox, and so the stacks grew taller, deeper, richer. Yet, the archives were not just a monument to what was. They were a promise to the future, that even if the galaxy fell into darkness, these truths would wait, untouched, until the next dawn. But the Force has no walls. Even as the holocrons sleep in their vaults, its current runs outward, spilling beyond the temple and into the streets, into the wilderness, into the cold emptiness between stars. That is why the Jedi said the archives never truly slept. They were a reflection, a physical echo of the Force's own memory, and the Force, patient and unblinking, remembers everything. It remembers the first light on Tython, when the first Jedi stood beneath alien suns and dared to raise their blades not in conquest, but in harmony. It remembers the great schisms, the shattering of orders, the mending that came after. It remembers the worlds that no longer spin in the sky, the cities reduced to rubble, the victories whispered about so quietly that only the Force could keep them alive. And perhaps that is why the archives feel almost alive at night. You can walk past a sealed chamber and sense the weight of what is inside, not just knowledge, but the emotions tied to it. A map that once guided settlers across uncharted hyperspace lanes still holds the thrill of discovery. A charred scrap of a Sith manuscript radiates the shadow of its maker's ambition. A child's training saber, stored for centuries after its owner fell in battle, hums faintly with the promise of what might have been. To touch such things is to feel the threads that weave the galaxy together, threads that stretch so far back you can no longer see their beginnings. The Jedi knew that one day even they might fade. The High Republic, for all its brilliance, was not immortal. The Force had shown them as much in dreams and warnings. Empires rise, orders fall, lightsabers dim. But the memory lingers. Even in the coldest nights of the galaxy's history, there will be someone, perhaps a lone wanderer, perhaps a reborn order, who will find the archives, or what remains of them, and listen. They will walk the quiet halls, run their hands along the shelves, and realize they are not alone. The Force will still be here, waiting like an old friend, patient as stone. And so the archives rest now, their heartbeats slow but steady. The stories are safe, the lessons endure. Outside, the city will wake to noise and chaos, and the galaxy will continue its eternal cycle of light and shadow. But here, beneath the temple's vaulted ceilings, time holds its breath. The Force is still speaking in whispers, in half-remembered songs, in the hum of sleeping crystals. You have only to close your eyes, breathe, and listen. For the archives may sleep, but the Force remembers, always.